So welcome everyone to the annual conference of the Center for the Study of Conversion and Inter-Religious Encounters, whose topic this year is Intra-Religious Disputes and Divisions. Intra-religious disputes and divisions, such a fundamental issue, such a critical issue, one that is relevant to every society at all times, and yet remains surprisingly understudied. Let's admit it. Disputes, disagreements, tensions, and lines of fracture within the same community of belief are not discussed or studied as much as they should. We devote considerable attention to inter-religious conflicts and divisions, and rightly so, but we tend to overlook the fact that divisions between groups are often rooted in dynamics unfolding within those groups themselves. Some reasons why a conflict between two groups arises may be that the more liberal currents within the group have lost out to more radical ones, or that a group has been weakened by internal divisions to the point where it became vulnerable to its domination by another group, or that internal turbulences led to the fragmentation of a group and dispersal of its members across different sectors of society. Most importantly, beyond their impact on relations with other communities, disputes and divisions within the same community of belief are a fundamental element in the formation of societies and dynamics of social life. As a social anthropologist trained at the School for High Studies in Social Sciences of Paris, I became aware of the importance of this issue early in my studies. Indeed, an invisible yet very lively intellectual struggle shaped the academic environment in which I evolved. The confrontation between two competing ways of understanding society that coexisted within anthropology from the 50s onwards. While some anthropological currents continued the tradition of describing exotic societies as homogeneous entities composed of people sharing the same beliefs and the same worldview, with texts like, they believe this, they think that, other researchers started to point out the evolutionist grounding of these representations. They began to highlight the individuality and agency of social actors, the diversity of perspectives within any given society, and the fact that social change also takes place within the traditional societies that had been described as timeless, as structured around the repetition of seasonal and traditional cycles. One of the main figures in this academic debate was the anthropologist Georges Balandier. He wrote a book on the history of the Kingdom of Congo at a time when most people didn't conceive that there were kingdoms, let alone history, in Africa before the Europeans came. He wrote a series of written portraits showing the singular perspectives and agency of different social actors living in Brazzaville in the 50s. And through his ethnographic work among decolonization movements in several African countries, he revealed an Africa characterized by diversity, ambiguity, and above all, historicity. Building on the concept of physical dynamics, which explains motion through the interaction of forces, Balandier developed dynamic anthropology, which invites to understand societies as evolving formations shaped by multiple forces whose tension with one another produce movement, change, and ultimately history. His groundbreaking work remains unfortunately little known, and I thought this was the perfect opportunity to share it with a wider audience. An audience made up of social scientists, historians, philologists, and scholars from other disciplines who all share a common commitment: the commitment to approach social and in particular religious formations with an open eye to their internal heterogeneity, debates, tensions, dynamics of transformation and redefinition. This conference offers a rare occasion not only to discover one another's works, but also to deepen our understanding of intra-religious disputes and divisions through comparison, dialogue, and shared reflection. It is with this objective in mind that this conference was designed. Together with my colleague Ishai Deichel, who is a delight to work with, and we will introduce tomorrow's sessions, we wanted to create a structure that would allow participants to leave the conference not only with the satisfaction of having attended a series of fascinating lectures, but with a richer understanding of the broader mechanisms at play and stakes underlying intra-religious disputes and divisions across contexts. For this reason, we organized the panels around themes intended to foster dialogue between different historical and religious settings. And we intentionally reserved substantial time for collective reflection and discussion. I therefore warmly encourage you to take part in the discussions, including the ones on topic you may not be familiar with. And I also encourage you to note every new idea, insight, and reflection that come to you during the conference. Tomorrow, during the plenary discussion, you will be invited to share all the insights and new ideas you developed during the conference with everyone. So for that final session, we will arrange the chairs in a circle, and I want speakers to know that if you're not comfortable with the setting of the room and you want to come closer or move some chairs, you're welcome to do it. About the timing, each speaker will talk from 15 to 20 minutes. The chairs of the panel will manage the time. Then there will be a discussion between the chair and the speakers, the co-panelists, of 10 to 15 minutes, and then discussion open with the audience for 10 to 15 minutes. If you haven't sent your PowerPoints yet, don't forget to do so. And if you have any logistical questions about transportation, parking, hotel, whatever, please ask Raya, who just left. She's here. Okay. Raya. So Raya, she's the superwoman of the center, and she solves every problem. Thank you, Raya, for your hard work and dedication to the center. I will now hand the floor to Oded Yisraeli, the director of the CSoC, for his opening words.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, all. Welcome to the annual conference of the Center for the Study of Conversion and Interreligious Encounters, dedicated this year to the theme of intra-religious disputes and divisions. This is my first conference as the center's director, which makes it especially meaningful to me. According to the Abrahamic tradition in the book of Genesis, the world was created in 7 days. But when was the dispute created? According to the Kabbalistic tradition expressed in the book of the Zohar, dispute was created on the 2nd day of creation. This is a profound and thought-provoking idea. On one hand, it means that dispute preceded the creation of humanity. It entered the world before any religion came into being, and even before any political party was founded. Dispute is the dialectical tendency embedded in the very foundations of creation. Contradiction, opposition, and dualism came into being before there was grace upon the earth, before the lights were hung in the heavens, before the great sea creatures were created. On the other hand, to say the dispute was created on the 2nd day means that there was indeed an act of creation before it, in which a single monolithic voice held sway, free of any internal contradiction. But even from this point, the world could not develop further. For there to be plant life, light, and living creatures, the fertile dialectic had to emerge on the 2nd day. It was the dialectical dispute that made what followed possible. Dispute, opposition, and dualism are not a flaw in creation, not the fruit of sin, not the human failure. They are infrastructure. They are the tendency embedded in the order of creation itself. That's not a bug but a feature. Disputes and divisions are precisely what made humanity and human religions fruitful, developed, and self-aware. The great religious schisms in history, the split between Judaism and Christianity, the Protestant Reformation, the division between Sunni and Shia Islam, not only broke up, but they also created, enriched, and sharpened. And yet, disputes and divisions have also sown great destruction, suffering, and ruin. Religious wars, persecutions, hatreds that have endured for centuries and to our sorrow are still with us today. The fire that warms can also burn. It is to this complex theme, dispute and division in all their dimensions, that the conference we are about to open is dedicated. Over the course of the next 3 days, we will examine this question from multiple angles and diverse perspectives, from the vantage point of history, sociology, the study of religion, anthropology, philosophy, and literature. We will try to touch on the moment of transition from dispute to schism, to understand the question of boundaries in religion, and to examine questions of authority and gender, of politics and violence, of mysticism and rationalism, and their role in the history of religion. Before we turn to the opening lecture, I would like to take this opportunity to thank a number of people without whom this conference would not have come to fruition. To Dr. Melissa Elbaz and Dr. Ishai Ditcher, the organizers of the conference, who worked for many months to build and shape this conference with thought, creativity, and dedication that cannot be taken for granted. To Raya Even David, where is Raya? The mythological, devoted administrator of the center, who attended to every detail, large and small, and whose talent, experience, and commitment are what make our conferences so pleasant and successful. To the fellows of the center for this year, and to the members of the steering committee, some of whom will also take part in the various sessions and enrich our discussions. And to all the speakers who have come from Israel and abroad, who have graciously agreed to share with us their research, their thoughts, and themselves. I wish us all 3 days of enlightening, fruitful, and enjoyable discussions. We now turn to the opening lecture. It is my honor to introduce Professor Moshe Halbertal from the Department of Jewish Thought at the Hebrew University and from the School of Law at New York University. Professor Halbertal, with whom I personally have the privilege to sharing several areas of research, is among the leading scholars today in the study of Jewish thought broadly conceived. He has written many books on diverse topics, including the philosophy of Halacha, medieval Jewish thought, Kabbalah, philosophy, ethics, and general political thought. As someone who has been familiar with Moshe's work for many years, I can say that what strikes me as most distinctive about it is the breadth and comprehensiveness of his perspectives, without ever losing the attentive reading and meticulous analysis that mark his work. For this reason, no one is better suited to open this wide-ranging conference. The topic of Professor Halbertal's lecture is Confronting Uncertainty and the Making of Sectarianism. Moshe, please.
Thank you very much, Oded, for your warm introduction, and Melissa and Ishai for inviting me and organizing this conference. Really, it's an honor and pleasure to be part of it. So clearly, I come to the question of sectarianism in this lecture from the perspective of rabbinic sources. I hope to touch upon larger questions of sectarianism, and as well some of the, I would say, sectarian anxiety that we all feel in contemporary life, which the question is, can we live together under radical disagreements? And what does it mean to live together under conditions of radical disagreements? That being the opening lecture, I will allow myself to speculate on broader contemporary questions as well. So I want to start with, we have in the literature, we have different definitions of sects. Usually it means an all-encompassing way of life, highly demanding of its members, distinguishing between us and them, right? A binary sense of being of the group and the outside group. When it's small enough, it's engages a strict initiation rites into the sect. Sometimes it's surrounded by a charismatic figure where loyalty to the charismatic figure is essential to the cement of the sect, etc. So we have a sense of what a sect is, though it's too broad to my sense, right? So you would say, well, that describes North Korea. North Korea is not a sect in any sense. It might describe the Soviet Union. It might describe strong nation states, etc. So by sect, at least for the purpose of this lecture, I mean, and I think it was echoed in Melissa's beginning comments, I mean, a sect comes from a section, right? A part of, right? So you imagine an overall structure of some type of unity or belonging that splits into sects, right? Hence the war of the Crusaders against the Muslim control of the land of Israel is not a sectarian conflict. But the conflict between Protestants and Catholic in Northern Ireland is a sectarian conflict because nominally they belong to the same religious order, the same way, let's say, with Shia and Sunni and other things. And you might say in the Soviet Union, you might create a sectarian condition between the Trotskyite and Stalinists or Bukharin understanding of the communist meaning. Apropos, we are here in Ben-Gurion University. I once read a beautiful story about Ben-Gurion that's connected to this topic. His son was in England and he fell in love with a non-Jewish woman. And he writes his father, I fell in love with a woman in England. There is a problem, she's not one of us. And Ben-Gurion answers him, in all of England, you couldn't find a woman but from the Shomer HaTzair. So that's a sense of, I would say, sectarianism as a kind of an internal problem, right? That's what we mean by a sectarian condition. Now, usually, and here again, very broad generalization. So sectarian means all those features that we talk, but it's a split within, it's an intra phenomenon, being section of. Now, usually, and again, very broad comments, usually it develops under two possible ways. One is that a group within the broader context withdraws from the larger context. It's not a usual schism because that group claims to carry all the meaningful aspects of the group as a whole, monopolizing it to itself, creating a split by forming a separate group through, let's say, in the Judean desert case, a sect will be through a different calendar, through strict laws that have to do with purity and impurity, strict initiation rites into the group. But the main thing is that splinter, that sect actually carries the brand of the group as a whole to itself. That's a feature in the history of sectarianism that we have to understand how it's created and what it's created, etc. Again, it's not a schism because that group continues to claim that it carries the meaning of the whole. Now, the second condition, which I'm more interested in, is a condition in which somehow, for a variety of reasons, a sectarian condition develops because the group as a whole cannot contain a shared form of life in conditions of diversity. Right? This is I'm gonna focus on that development, right? You had a shared way of life where conditions of diversity emerge naturally, differences of opinion, differences of practices, etc. And the community cannot develop a way of containing it, and a debate in the community turns the community into two communities. So we have those structures as well that I'm interested here. And it's not binary, right? So we say, when does it happen that a marriage, intermarriage is not possible of groups that sharing the same thing? Religious practices are not possible within the same sphere. So it's really about the splitting of the community into two communities, given an escalation of a debate in the community that kind of splits the community into two. And that's a very different phenomenon than the first one. Okay. Now, I'm going to focus on the rabbinic case at large. I mean, there's so much to talk about it. And focus on particular, maybe a possible contribution of mine to the problem that has to do with dealing with uncertainty. And it's known, for those who study Chazal, there is a theme, there is an idea that kind of post-Yavne or Yavne plus is under kind of a sectarian trauma. That there is a sectarian trauma of the end of the Second Temple times, right? There is a statement in the Talmud that says in the Yerushalmi, Lo galu Israel, destruction and exile began, ad shenasu 24 katot shel minim. Till this is in the Yerushalmi in Sanhedrin, where it says Israel lost its sovereignty, its temple, etc., because they have split it into 24 groups of heresy. It's quite a number. But it represents a backward looking at the kind of the trauma that we have to overcome, which is sectarianism. It's what destroyed us. And then the prohibition, by the way, a very interesting prohibition that already appears in the Sifri, in the Tanaitic sources, against sectarian formation, right? Lo titgodedu, right? It's a very creative reading of that verse. Lo titgodedu, lo ta'asu agudot. You cannot form yourself into different groupings. And then the Talmud tries to ask, what does it mean, right? Two customs, different customs in the same city, etc., etc. But it is a kind of almost an anti-sectarian prohibition, given, we would say, the sectarian trauma. Now, rabbinic culture, I'm following Shaya Cohen and Vered Noam and others who dealt with that. Rabbinic culture has different devices of trying to de-escalate sectarian potential, mainly between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So one example, right? One classic example and a very important example, whether it reflects the actual history or whether it reflects a normative idea, it appears in the question of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, in particular, when they had debate about procedures of marriage and divorce, right? So let's say there is a differences of what constitutes a get, a divorce bill, At that moment, you have differences about procedures in marriage and divorce. So let's say one get for Beit Shammai is considered valid or invalid, and for Beit Hillel it's valid, and then the wife remarries on the assumption that she is divorced already, while the other school of law thinks of her as still married. The children then becomes bastard, etc. It's contaminating through next generations, etc. And then you cannot marry each other, right? And we have this, by the way, we have this situation halachically in contemporary halacha, or let's say 19th century or earlier, and Daniel Lasker knows much more about that, with Karaite halacha, right? You say, well, can Karaites and Rabbinites marry each other, given that they have, for example, different definitions of incest? If you think that a woman cannot marry her uncle, which is very common in rabbinic halacha, or you think that the divorce bill of the other group is actually not a divorce, etc., then you develop all those questions. Can we live together in the most basic sense, which is marrying one another? And there is a famous Tosefta that is brought to bear on this question, right? Af al pi shenechleku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, and then the Tosefta mentions a whole set of debates about the marriage and divorce, right? בצרות, החיות, ובספק אשת איש, ובגט ישן, והמקדש את האישה בשווה פרוטה, etc., etc. So we have a sectarian potential here, right? אף על פי כן לא נמנעו מלישא נשים אלו את אלו, they didn't avoid intermarrying, although there is all those debates, שנאמר, האמת והשלום אהבו. You should love truth and peace. So for the sake of social harmony, for the sake of peace, you kind of have to give up your own truth. And then comes the question of, has to do with issues of purity and impurity, and issues that have to do with kashrut, אף על פי שאלו אוסרים ואלו מתירים, לא נמנעו עושים טהרות אלו על גבי אלו, they shared utensils and feast, eating together, לקיים מה שנאמר, right, to follow what it says, כל דרך איש זך בעיניו וטוחן ליבות השם. Each person thinks about his own way as pure, as righteous, but God searches the heart, measures the heart. Tochen libot Hashem. Here again, it's a kind of a giving up of a strict conception of truth through the purity of intentions, etc., that allows you, actually, this is a case where the Tosefta, the Mishnah, actually directly confront what we will call a sectarian potential. Debates that might undermine the capacity of shared life between Hillel and Shammai. Now, there are other mechanisms, right? The very maybe structure of the Mishnah itself, some people would say, the very canonical form of mentioning minority opinions in the canon allows for an inclusiveness or overcoming sectarian potential, right? So there is a Mishnah, a very rare Mishnah that actually reflects on the Mishnah itself in Eduyot that asks, Lama nishnu divrei yachid? Why there are debates in the Mishnah, right? By the way, there is a debate in the Mishnah, or there are debates in the Mishnah in that set of arguments. But one opinion said, well, the minority opinion is mentioned, so in the future, it could be revived by a lower court. Meaning, if you are, let's say, Beit Shammai, and the law is always, halacha is always against Beit Shammai, more or less, and you are a Rabbi Eliezer, which is a student of Beit Shammai, you're always in a minority. If you wouldn't have been recorded in the legal memory of the community, what will happen is you're going to form your own Mishnah. That structure of mentioning minority opinions as legitimate options for future revival is a way of confronting what we will call sectarian potential. Then we have another case which is very interesting to sectarian potential that has to do with calendar, the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah that blocks debate on calendar because not sharing a calendar means not being able to have a shared religious life and shared life, etc. And there is different. Now, I want to focus on my contribution to the avoiding sectarian potential in rabbinic material, and also maybe it will help to generate a general insight in the question of sectarianism, has to do with uncertainty. Now, I worked on the problem of uncertainty, Sfekot, in rabbinic, in Tanaitic literature, and I realized one thing, that everybody who studies Mishnah sees the explosion of uncertainty issues, right? Sfekot are all over the place. All over the place, in Kodashim, in Nashim, in Ta'arot, in etc., etc. They deal with uncertainty in a broad variety of concepts. By the way, I've never seen in all the Dead Sea Scroll material any discussion of uncertainty, of Safek, how to deal with uncertainty. And I began to explore this question. I mean, this question has very interesting dimensions from different directions. First of all, why is this obsession with Sfekot all over the place? But one aspect that caught my interest is the different rules of confronting uncertainty. And I want to start with issues of purity, right? By the way, laws of purity, from anybody who understands sectarian making, laws of purity are the centerpiece of separating, right? Caste structures, etc., etc. They all hang on issues of pure and defiled, etc., tamen, tahor, etc. And this is the mechanism of separation, להבדיל בין הטמא לטהור, especially when it's contaminating. So you cannot have a shared public space of the terorim and tmeim, etc. Now I'm gonna get to rules of Sfekot that has to do with issues of with taharot that struck me as very interesting about sectarian conditions. The main rule in Sfekot in taharot, for those who study Masechet Taharot, by the way, very original, very hard to find any sources within biblical material for that rule, but it dominates all questions of uncertainty. Sfekot is the distinction between Reshut HaYachid, the private realm, and Reshut HaRabim, the public realm. And it says, well, Safek Tuma Birshut HaYachid, Safek Reshut HaYachid Tameh, whenever you have doubt whether this object is impure or not, or that person is pure or not, in Reshut HaYachid, you rule that it's tameh, it's impure. But in Reshut HaRabim, if it's in the public space, Safek Tuma B'Reshut HaRabim tahor. By the way, if you read carefully the material, this applies not only the issues of, I would say, proximate 50-50 case, but even if there is a majority, there is statistical probability of impurity in Reshut HaRabim, right? The Tosefta says, Tish'a shratzim v'tzfardea, right? 9 insects and a frog. A frog doesn't defile like other insects. Birshut HaYachid, Birshut HaRabim tahor, right? Even if there is a potential of 1 to 10, it's tahor. On the other hand, Birshut HaRabim, Tish'a tzfardeim, 9 frogs and 1 insect, tameh. It's a very strict division between Reshut HaRabim and Reshut HaYachid. And that, I remember encountering it, and I'm not taking it as a given. I'm asking about the very formation of this rule concerning uncertainty. And when you think about it, it allows actually walking in Reshut HaRabim, right? If you would think that Safek Tuma B'Reshut HaRabim naturally tameh, or not only that, that having a doubt about public space vis-a-vis Reshut HaRabim, etc., what you will not being what you will block is the possibility of having a shared public space for those who actually take upon themselves rules or norms of purity. And that's what's actually happening with the Dead Sea sects, right? They think that Jerusalem is actually a place of it's a defiled realm, and other public spaces. By the way, it's very interesting. We know that the distinction between Reshut HaRabim and Reshut HaYachid in Halacha appears in different areas of Halacha, right? It appears in the laws of Shabbat, right? Clearly, that's the main place, right? Where moving an object from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim is prohibited. And it appears in Nezikin, in issues of torts, where different liabilities that you have in private realm, you don't have in the public realm, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, very interesting, the Mishnah then gets into a whole set of definition of what is public space vis-a-vis purity issues, right? Vis-a-vis tarot. And it says, and it compares it with Shabbat. So it gives very interesting idea. Basilica is a public structure. Reshut HaYachid leShabbat, it's actually considered the private realm in Shabbat because it's surrounded with 4 walls and has particular entries, right? The Reshut HaRabim leTumah, it's considered Reshut HaRabim to matters of purity and impurity. And the reason is that though it's technically one realm, a private realm, since many people gather there, it's considered Reshut HaRabim for the purposes of Tum'ah because you don't control who enters. And at the moment you don't know who enters and who's not entering, and you fear uncertainty, you would not be able to take part in that realm. So I would say the following. Here's a kind of a second order definition of sectarian mentality is that you search for complete certainty in your friction in the world. You want to create an all-encompassing world in which your friction with uncertainty vis-a-vis purity is not going to emerge. Hence, you have to isolate yourself from the shared space. By the way, one very interesting parallel of, again, issues of uncertainty has to do with markets. If you think about markets and buying in the market, shuk, one thing that defines markets is in markets, you would never know the origin of the produce, right? That's the point of markets, right? Different produce flow into the markets through intermediaries, merchants, right? They bring stuff from all over, meat, fruit, etc., different objects. And you have then exchange in the market, right? But you never know. A market, by the way, any exchange in the market is a world of uncertainty, right? If you buy from the stance of a farmer fruits on the side of his field, or from a particular shop of a producer, of someone who slaughters meat, etc., you know the origin of the meat. You know whether those fruits were taifs and truma and orla and all those issues that have to do with kashrut of foods were meticulously followed or not, right? The market exchanges is confronting uncertainty. By the way, huge material about what can and what you cannot buy in markets, etc., appear, emerge, etc. Now, there is a very interesting rule concerning markets in the Mishnah that, by the way, then serves a very important norm vis-a-vis issues of Svekot in Halacha. And I'm going to quote from a Mishnah, Tosefta in Dmai. By the way, Dmai is all about uncertainties. And it says the following, כל העיר מוכרים מתוקן. All the city sell, all farmers or all shops in the city sell מתוקן, something that actually went through the proper halachic procedures of production. ואחד מוכר שאינו מתוקן. One person sells something that is produced improperly, halachically. ואינו יודע מאיזה הם לקח. Now there is a problem. I don't know from whom did I buy. Is uncertainty. הרי זה אסור. You're not allowed to eat that. כל העיר מוכרים בשר שחוטה. In all the city, the butchers sell meat that was properly slaughtered. ואחד מוכר בשר נבלה, but one of them sells meat that wasn't properly slaughtered. ואינו יודע מאיזה הם לקח. You don't know whom did you buy from. הרי זה אסור. You're not allowed to. Even this is a probability of what? 1 to 80, 1 to 100, 1 to 20, 1 to 10. Now comes the market. אבל הלוקח מן השוק, the one who buys in the market, he buys meat or fruits that flew through mediation of merchants, הולכים אחר הרוב. You follow majority, statistically. By the way, even a majority of 51 to 49, right? By the way, I mean, this, if someone knows the history of Sfekot in Halacha, that's the source of the distinction between Kavua and Parish and other things that are very complicated. But the origin of the rule is the following. When you buy in a shop from a producer, you know you can find out the source of the produce. Hence, if you confront a doubt of it, it has to do with your responsibility not following through what you could have checked. But in the marketplace, you just statistically follow the majority. Now, this is a very non-sectarian mentality, right? Right, because if you have if you're kind of a Dead Sea Scroll person, right, coming from the area, that area, you're going to buy produce from only people whom you know in order not to face uncertainty. So what I found in norms of Sekot, a lot of norms of uncertainty, has to do with how to guide you in a diverse, complex reality, allowing for a possibility of shared either market or public spaces as a guiding structures that have to do with I would say ways in which you confront what I would call sectarian potential. So this is just some thoughts about what I would call one feature, maybe a general feature, is separating or separateness is structured on based upon a search for avoiding friction with uncertainty. במקום שיש ספק, אין ספק. This is a rule that is applied in a different realm. This idea that you have to live a life without encountering uncertainty, and you don't have actually norms of managing that world, that will be a sectarian potential. Because in the public realm, in issues of kashrut or tahara, you're going to always face diversity of practices and opinions, etc., etc. By the way, when we come to lineage, it's a huge issue, because at the moment there is diverse rules about marriage and divorce, you're going to find uncertain lineage and marriage problems, etc., etc. And without these rules of chazaka, rov, other things, you're not going to allow the possibility of actually marrying or cross marriage within the same community will be dramatically reduced. And if you read the later rabbinic material on rabbis, halachists to ask, can we marry Karaites, right? You read even Rav Ovadia Yosef, who was a rabbi in Cairo, and actually had a living encounter with that community. And he uses a lot of those rules about norms of Sfekot, that you don't need absolute uncertainty to engage with the world in a very interesting way vis-a-vis those issues. Okay, what I would like to do, just finishing with the following maybe question or remark or thought about our present condition. Clearly, we are at this kind of an age of anxiety vis-a-vis our capacity to live together under differences, right? And the liberal order, you might say, was all about allowing that possibility, right? And we see the crumbling of the liberal order in front of us, right? We say there are, if I want to do in snapshot, there are 4 features that the liberal ethos developed in order to have the potential of living together under differences. One is the idea of toleration. You say, well, at the moment, each of us will going to have access to state means of coercion to impose our way of life on others. That means the end of the capacity to live together. And the origin of liberalism in the 17th, 18th century has to do actually with intra-religious conflict among Christians in Europe. So basic principle of toleration. Then you have this other idea in which that says, well, so we are all obligated and all accept upon us not to use the coercive machinery of the state to impose our worldview or our way of life on others. That's a good thing for the capacity to live together with differences. Then there is another feature, a second feature that says, well, though we have substantive disagreement, we have a second order non-violent procedures to adjudicate those disagreements through elections, through court decisions, et cetera, et cetera. We can see, by the way, the capacity to live together with disagreements crumbles when there is a clash about those second order procedures, right? Which we all are living as we talk in Israel and in other places, right? But that's all. Then there is the other idea, which is very typical for liberal world and very important, is that the majoritarian procedure of democracy doesn't mean annihilation of the minority. The minority will have its second chance, right? Minorities are willing to cooperate with majorities, even if they lose, because they feel that they're not silenced. And not only that, they're going to have their time, maybe the next round of elections. And fourth, which is, I would say, for all of us, maybe in the academy, in the world that seeks for certain type of genuine explorations of the world, is that we share at least factual description of the world, that we kind of coalesce together. So I'm going to end with a certain experiment I did in class in the US. I said, we're talking off the record. I said to the class, don't worry. I want to ask you a few questions about your political convictions. So I asked them, how many of you think that there is a human-made global warming? It's a factual problem. In the class I teach in the East Coast, 20% thought that there isn't such a problem. 80% thought that there is a human-made global warming problem. Then I asked them, how many of you think that masks are helpful in time of pandemic? It was after the coronavirus pandemic. And it was the same split. By the way, the same 20% who thought that there isn't human-made global warming thought that masks are completely unhelpful in times of pandemic. Then I asked, how many of you are pro-choice or pro-life, meaning abortion? And then I saw it's more or less the same split. Then I said to them, how many of you think there are only two genders or not? The same split. I said, I want you to contemplate on what's happening here, because there is no logical relationship between the issue of global warming, abortion, etc., etc. What you happen is, I'm interested in this. I would say the sectarian potential is the following: when propositions about facts become articles of faith, they become a matter of identity, right? I mean, it's very complex. It's not that I told them I don't have a strict position about those issues. I mean, they're very complicated. But the formation, when everything is politics, when there is no kind of a way of outside our, you would say, church identities, think or figure out what facts could be. So we know at least what is it that we argue about. That's a moment in which sectarian position, because I think Thucydides has said about stasis, about civil war, he says, that civil war will going to happen when words do not mean anything, right? There's nothing that stands beyond words. So, in any event, so I'm making those comments because I'm interested in issues that have to do with, I would say, development of sectarian potential that comes with the breakdown of what we thought political or cultural structures that allow living under uncertainty, right? That this is, as we say, what's interesting about it is that issues have a serious history to them. So thank you, and just my thoughts about this huge issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have no time, sorry. We have now 10 minutes of break. Okay, and we go on to the next session. Thank you very much.